A father, desperate to clear his name and redirect suspicion in the disappearance of his two young children, made a bold request, a polygraph test. He wanted to face the machine head-on, to prove his innocence not with words, but with data. In his mind, passing that test would silence rumors, stop the online speculation, and force investigators to look elsewhere. What began as an act of transparency soon became one of the most defining moments in this ongoing investigation. Before we go further, hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss first-hand updates on this story and others we're covering. From the moment the children vanished, the father knew suspicion would fall his way. In most missing person cases, investigators begin close to home, examining parents and relatives first. It's a routine part of any major investigation, but when days stretched into weeks with no sign of the children, whispers began to grow louder. Online discussions painted him as either a victim of tragedy or a potential suspect hiding in plain sight. That mounting pressure led him to take control of the narrative. He didn't wait for investigators to suggest it. He asked for the polygraph himself. He believed that the fastest way to move the investigation forward was to eliminate himself from the list of suspects. "If I take the test and pass," he told reporters, "they'll have to look elsewhere." For him, the polygraph wasn't just about defending his reputation. It was about forcing progress in a case that felt frozen. Investigators agreed to the request, though some were hesitant. Polygraphs are controversial. They can't be used as definitive proof in court, but they can influence the direction of an inquiry. Still, arranging one would require careful planning, especially since both the father's team and law enforcement wanted to avoid claims of bias or procedural flaws. That's when authorities made a rare move. They brought in an examiner from outside the region, a neutral professional whose credentials would withstand both public scrutiny and legal review. The decision to fly in an external specialist sent a clear signal. This wasn't going to be a rushed or symbolic test. It was going to be thorough, methodical, and handled to the highest investigative standards. For the father, that gesture reinforced the seriousness of his effort. For police, it ensured that whatever results came out of the session would be defensible and credible should questions later arise. By the time the examiner arrived, nearly 3 weeks had passed since the children went missing. Those first weeks had been consumed by frantic searches, drones scanning open fields, volunteers combing through wooded areas, and officers working around the clock. But as search efforts tapered off, the focus began to shift from rescue to investigation. This was a point when detectives began reassessing everything: statements, timelines, phone records, and relationships. The father's polygraph became part of that shift. It wasn't just a personal act. It was a procedural pivot in how investigators approached the mystery. When the test began, the questions were direct and chilling. Each one focused on the possibility that the children were no longer alive. Did you kill them? Were you an accessory to their deaths? Do you know who did? According to the father, those were among the core questions repeated in different wording. It wasn't what he expected. He had assumed the test would focus on disappearance, on where the children might be, or who last saw them. But instead, every question presumed the worst. That approach reflected investigators' internal strategy to determine as early as possible whether they were searching for missing children or investigating a potential homicide. For the father, that framing was devastating. He said it felt as though the test assumed guilt before even measuring truth. Yet he agreed to proceed. He was determined to answer every question, no matter how painful, and to do so as calmly as possible. What followed were 3 consecutive polygraph sessions lasting about 3 hours in total. Between sessions, the examiner recalibrated the instruments and rephrased the questions. The repetition was intentional. It was meant to test the consistency of his physiological responses. But to the man sitting in that chair, it felt like a psychological gauntlet. His heart raced, palms sweated, and breathing quickened. Every beep, every pause from the examiner felt like judgment. When it was over, the examiner told him he had passed. The relief, he later said, was overwhelming. For the first time in weeks, he felt seen, not as a suspect, but as a father trying to bring his children home. Investigators confirmed that his results were consistent and that he showed no signs of deception. That didn't end the investigation, but it did change its tone. Detectives began shifting their focus, re-examining other individuals who had access to property and following leads that had previously been sidelined. Still, it's important to remember that a polygraph doesn't measure lies. It measures stress. The machine tracks heart rate, skin conductivity, and breathing patterns. Examiners interpret those physiological changes as possible indicators of truth or deception, but nerves, medication, or even grief can alter results. For that reason, polygraph results aren't considered definitive proof of innocence or guilt. At best, they guide investigators, helping them decide which paths to prioritize. For the father, though, passing the test was a symbolic victory. It helped restore some of his credibility in the eyes of the public, even if legally it proved nothing. In the days that followed, he called for others connected to the case to undergo the same test. He argued that if fairness was a goal, everyone, family, neighbors, and anyone who found evidence, should face the same scrutiny. Police, however, declined to make those results public. They cited ongoing investigative needs and the legal requirement to protect sensitive material. That secrecy, while standard in law enforcement, frustrated the father and many supporters who saw it as withholding crucial transparency. And yet, beneath the frustration lies a difficult truth. Polygraphs occupy a strange place in modern investigations. They are part science, part psychology, a tool that can shape narratives without proving them. For investigators, they help prioritize evidence and test consistency in witness accounts. For the public, they often symbolize either vindication or deception, depending on who passes and who refuses. This case, more than most, captures that duality. The father's experience shows how a polygraph can serve both as a procedural step and an emotional crucible. It can clear suspicion in the short term, influence how resources are allocated, and shift the public perception, but it cannot provide closure. True answers, in cases like this, come not from a needle's movement on paper, but from forensic data, verified evidence, and time. In the end, the father's decision to take the test reflected both courage and desperation. It was a human response to extraordinary pressure, a plea for truth in a world full of speculation. The investigation continues, slowly and methodically, guided by facts, not assumptions. And as families, investigators, and the public wait for clarity, one thing remains constant. The search for truth is rarely instant and never simple.